There's only one Dr. Aubrey de Grey. Aubrey is the world's leading longevity entrepreneur, bar none. His ability to raise money to build out the various therapeutic research programs is phenomenal. His tenacity is incredible. His fortitude and integrity go without words because they are within the very words and phrases that he uses when he explains what life extension is. He is so exceedingly knowledgeable and so gracious in sharing his knowledge with everyone, and has been for a number of years. I've known Aubrey for over 2 decades, and there has never been a moment when I doubted the level of understanding he has or the level, again, of his integrity. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome Aubrey de Grey. Thank you.
Oh, okay, Sergio said I could start, so I shall. That means I shall do this. And now I shall share my screen. Right, share screen. That one. All right. So, thank you all. I am not exactly sure what time I was originally scheduled to be giving this talk, but I overslept. So I am grateful that Jose was able to sort it out and schedule me to give it now. I'm going to give essentially the same talk that I gave a week or so ago at RADFest. And the reason I'm going to do that is because this is a rather unusual talk in which I want to celebrate the fact that SENS is 21 years old. And I want to review a few of the events that occurred 21 years ago and that got us to the very much more advanced stage of intervening in aging than we were back then. So I'm going to start by talking about, by talking about this man. Many of you will recognize him. You will see, those of you who don't recognize him will see that he's sitting in a wheelchair, despite the fact that he is very muscular. And that is because when he was 35, he had a bad accident in a gym, if I remember rightly, and was since that time paralyzed from the waist down. And he spent a number of years and quite a bit of money that he'd made in the financial markets trying to accelerate progress in spinal cord injury treatments, obviously because he would be a beneficiary of such progress. But towards the end of the 1990s, Dave decided that actually his focus was wrong, that even if he were to benefit from novel treatments that would restore his functionality from the waist down, nevertheless, he would still be aging, and he would not have all that long to live, only as long as other people live. And he didn't think much of that, so he decided to do something about it. He created the Maximum Life Foundation, hired a couple of people, and the first thing he did, very sensibly, was he ran a workshop. This workshop happened in July of 2000, and it brought together a number of biomedical technologists from various fields with the stated purpose of identifying, brainstorming, working towards new ways of attacking aging as a medical problem. And it was the first such meeting that I'd been involved in. I'd been in the gerontology community for only a couple of years at that point, and not very many people knew me. More people kind of knew me online at that point, to be honest. But there were 3 very credentialed gerontologists there, 3 senior and very distinguished members of the field, Michael Rose, George Roth, and Rick Weindruck. And so we talked about what to do about aging. And honestly, it was very disappointing to me. I spent the first day of the meeting getting increasingly frustrated that we were simply rehashing stuff that was the polar opposite of radical new thinking. It was really just what was going on already. It was not revolutionary at all. And by the end of the first day, I'd become quite frustrated. And back then, I didn't travel so much as I do these days. So I still had a circadian rhythm. And I had jet lag because I had come in from the UK into Los Angeles, or to be more precise, Manhattan Beach. We had this meeting in a hotel in Manhattan Beach, and George Roth described the enterprise as the Manhattan Beach Project. That night, therefore, I couldn't sleep, and I was pacing up and down in my hotel room, and I had the genuine, no other word for it, eureka moment that has led to everything that I and the field have done since. The essence of it, of course, was that the best approach, the most practical approach to dealing with aging might be to repair the damage that the body does to itself throughout life, rather than the prevailing paradigm, which was to try to make the body run more cleanly and, in other words, slow down the rate at which the body creates that damage in the first place. And it all happened, this meeting, because of this man. As you will see, he recently deanimated, and I am pleased that I have been told that he got a reasonably good cryopreservation, so that, of course, is why I am writing those dates the way I am. Let us look forward to welcoming him back in due course. But that's all I want to say about Dave. This, of course, is the central paradigm of SENS, the idea that even though we cannot separate metabolism from pathology by separating metabolism from damage, nor by separating damage from pathology, nevertheless we can separate those two processes from each other by repairing the damage. And of course, that day, that night in Manhattan Beach, I did more than just think of this idea. I also fleshed it out during those hours by identifying the categories of SENS and the ways in which we might go about implementing this damage repair. The following morning, I came down and, actually about 6 a.m. I think, I came down and scribbled it all out as a chart on a flip chart that was in the conference room. And I asked Pete Passaro, the guy who was doing the organizing, I asked him to give me 10 minutes to explain it, which he did, and which I did. And nobody understood a word that I said. And I'm quite sure that was my fault. It's very difficult sometimes to put forward a radical new idea when you've only just had it yourself. But anyway, that didn't go anywhere that day. But the following day, a lot more happened. I can still remember sitting in LAX on the way home and fleshing it out further. And shortly after that, I got in touch with a few other distinguished gerontologists with an invitation to them to join me at my own workshop, which happened at the Children's Hospital Research Institute in Oakland, Corey, which was at that time the headquarters of Bruce Ames, the very distinguished biochemist. He had asked me to spend a couple of weeks in his lab, and I took that opportunity to run this workshop. It was on October the 1st of 2000. And the purpose of the workshop, of course, was to demolish my idea. I wanted these people to come along and do their best to identify ironclad reasons why damage repair could not work as a way to postpone the health problems of late life. And these people came from a variety of different areas of expertise within gerontology. And of course, I did not ask them to speak about their own work in any way. I asked them to speak about the aspects of the damage repair concept that they were most equipped to address. And, the idea survived that day. It was not demolished, with the result that we decided we could write a paper summarizing it and all of the participants in the workshop signed up as authors. Here they are. This paper didn't come out until 2002 because, well, reviewers were also a little bit slow to understand what really we were saying. And, I've got to be honest, actually, I don't really think that most of the participants in this workshop entirely got it. I think really the only person who entirely understood the full force of what I was saying on that day was Judy Campisi. But for all that, we discussed these ideas thoroughly enough that we were able to write them up. And I want now to show you the abstract of that paper. The reason I want to do so, and the reason I would like, while I'm wittering on, why I would like you actually to read the whole thing, is because I am extremely impressed by how similar this description of the damage repair concept is to what I or others would say about that paradigm today. The fact is that is really good news. It's insanely important that this idea has stood the test of time, because that is very strong evidence that it will continue to stand the test of time going forward, and that we really do have a sufficiently strong understanding of what aging is to be able to think coherently and to actually move forward as technologists rather than as curiosity-driven basic scientists to actually bring this about. The fact is that the the major categories of damage that we sketched out in that paper are also, broadly speaking, the same as the ones that we talk about today. Not quite the same, though, so I think I'll spend a few minutes discussing what the differences are. This table is taken directly from that paper, and the first thing that you will see is that there are not 7 categories the way there always are these days. Rather, there are 9 categories. If you look closely, though, you will see that the first 7 are identically the ones that I talk about today. The last 2 have been dropped, and in fact that happened in about 2003. The reason that I dropped them was simply because they were subsumed into the other 7 categories. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We are very focused these days on the decline of the immune system and the rejuvenation of the immune system, not least because success has actually been seen even in the clinic in relation to certain aspects of this. Back then, it was very well understood that the shrinkage and atrophy of the thymus was an extremely important component of the decline in the immune system. And back then, there was a particular growth factor named IL-7, which was looking like the most promising intervention to regrow the thymus. These days, IL-7 doesn't get much attention. And, of course, the TRIM trial, orchestrated by Greg Fay and his colleagues, has shown great success in the clinic in actual human beings using growth hormone, along with a couple of other factors. So we are well on the way here. But when I say that the decline of the immune system can be subsumed into the other categories, what do I mean? Well, of course, in the case of regrowing the thymus, what we mean is this is an example of repairing cell loss. In other words, restoring the cellularity, the number of cells in the thymus, so that it can resume its youthful activity. That is not the only thing we have to do in terms of reversing the decline in the immune system. We also have to eliminate certain cells that have got into a senescence-like state, a state often called anergy, where they are not doing all the things they're supposed to do. And that is actually why I now, these days, use a slightly different terminology for the second of the SENS strands that I'm listing here in this table. Rather than talking about senescent cells, I talk about death-resistant cells, cells which the body would like to eliminate but fails to eliminate. And, of course, senescent cells are simply a subset of death-resistant cells. So that is why the immune system is no longer a separate category in the SENS classification. The same kind of thing goes for the endocrine system, the decline in secretion or activity of hormones. This happens, of course, because the glands that secrete these hormones either atrophy or their cells become less functional, or, of course, in many cases, it's resistance to the hormone, the most famous case of which is insulin resistance in the lead up to type 2 diabetes. And back then, I was quite fond of the idea that muscle was the right tissue to be engineering to become essentially a factory for hormones that were not being secreted adequately by other tissues. I think we can do better than that now. There are various other ways to restore the secretion of hormones and indeed the response to them. But the key thing I want to point out here is that this is a case, again, of restoring the cellularity and or restoring the internal health of cells that have the job of creating these hormones or responding to them. So we need to be sure that we can do this, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the other categories again. I mention this specifically not just because it's a change that happened back in 2003, but also because it explains the absence from the SENS classification of a very important member of the hallmarks classification that was proposed and presented by 5 of our colleagues back in 2013, 3 of those colleagues, of course, being Spanish. The category I'm talking about here is intercellular communication. Now, what is that? Communication between cells. That's what hormones do. They are responsible for transmitting signals and allowing cells of one type to influence the behavior of cells of another type at a distant location in the body. And they do it, of course, through the circulatory system, through the blood. Now, why is that relevant to intercellular communication? Because in the Hallmarks paper in 2013, the authors, of course, talked at great length about the very exciting progress that had been made in the previous decade in parabiosis, in the rejuvenation of old animals by connecting their circulatory system to that of a young animal. That work has, of course, proceeded very significantly since then, with the development of similar techniques that do not involve surgery, but rather only involve the exchange of plasma. We're very proud at SENS Research Foundation that we funded some of the very most foundational work in that area, the work of Justin Rebo in the lab of the Conboys. But the point is that intercellular communication is not just something that we left out of the SENS classification back in 2000. It was absolutely there. It's just that the blood, the circulatory system, is merely a highway. It is a conduit by which cells influence each other, and therefore the youth, the biological age, so to speak, of the blood is a purely secondary side effect of the biological age of the cells that secrete stuff into the blood or take stuff out of the blood. And therefore, it does not merit, in my view, the inclusion as a category of its own. So here we are now, of course, with the 7 categories on the left and the various repair strategies on the right. Again, let me stress how important it is that this classification has stood the test of 21 years of analysis. I've been out there, as you all know, making a serious nuisance of myself all that time, inviting my colleagues to identify things that do not naturally fit into this classification. And I still seem to be getting away with it. So again, this is extremely encouraging news that we are not having to constantly update this, because that shows that we are unlikely to have to update it in the future either. So I'm going to spend my last 5 or 10 minutes talking about where we go from here. The temptation is to think, oh, well, it's pretty much done, isn't it? Because, let's face it, we have an industry now, the private sector have come in, People like Jeff Bezos are putting massive amounts of money into this. Furthermore, I have reasonable optimism that Altos Labs is going to make an actual contribution to accelerating progress, in marked contrast to the efforts made by other extremely wealthy people in the form of the Ellison Medical Foundation 20-odd years ago, and indeed Calico maybe 8 years ago. Altos Labs has hired the right people, and it's focusing on two of the most important and promising areas of rejuvenation. First of all, diagnosis of rejuvenation, which is extraordinarily important in the form of improving the reliability and quality of biological clocks, such as epigenetic clocks in particular. And secondly, as I'm sure you know, partial reprogramming, the idea of using Yamanaka factors or possibly other factors, which might be safer, to restore and reverse the biological age of cells, and therefore to allow those cells to do better damage repair than they otherwise can. This is an area that, may not pan out. It may end up just never being safe enough. It may be too oncogenic. But I think there are chances that it will work out. So that's all great. But the thing is that at the end of the day, the private sector will always work predominantly on the low-hanging fruit, on areas which can reach the clinic and actually translate into revenue relatively soon. And that, unfortunately, means that we need to do the hard stuff ourselves in the non-profit world. Now, you may be thinking, well, hang on, Calico is a company, but it prides itself on taking a long view. The problem is that Calico prides itself a little bit too much on taking a long view and has completely failed to put together any kind of actual strategy, let alone following the strategy that we've already got that you're looking at right now. But that's life. However, yes, so there's more to do. Let's first talk about cryonics. Cryonics is, of course, an area which has received a great deal of enthusiastic attention from the futurist community for decades and decades, but it has received a pitifully small amount of financial support from anyone, and that has definitely held it back. There are a few extraordinarily promising areas within the cryonics research field in the form of improvements to the quality of cryopreservation, which is, of course, absolutely vital for any chance of ever being able to cryopreserve somebody and then wake them up just by warming them up and using new medicine to address whatever it was that they became pronounced legally dead for. The progress in those areas of cryonics research has been extraordinarily slow, and something needs to be done about that, and it needs to be done really soon. I've been able to do a bit by directing funds towards certain important areas of work, but there's far more that needs to be done. It's not just cryonics, of course. If we look at the areas of the body that are the most challenging to repair, then, of course, the brain is always the one that comes up first. It's the one that's most important. It's the one that we can't just replace all in one go the way that you can with an organ like the liver or the heart. And honestly, some people in this field, some very good people, are concerned that the molecular and cellular approach to rejuvenating the brain is just never going to be quite thorough enough. I am not one of those people. I think that we are well on the way to rejuvenating the brain well enough to achieve longevity escape velocity within the next decade or two. But I could be wrong. So I am extremely heartened that there are people out there who are not so optimistic as me about that, and who are looking at more radical approaches, which would involve surgery, to essentially replace the brain piece by piece, with pieces that are small enough, especially with certain preconditioning, so that memory and personality are preserved, but in the context of renewed cells and renewed cellular structures. So that is just another example of the sort of thing that I don't think is going to get funded by the private sector anytime soon. And I want everybody here in the futurist community to understand that the work that we have done so far, which we can call SENS 1.0, and indeed the work that non-profits, including SENS Research Foundation, are continuing to pursue, will not, for sure, is not certain to get us to longevity escape velocity. I think it probably will, but we've also got to stay beyond longevity escape velocity after that. So it is no way too soon to be considering and conceptualizing and indeed pursuing technologies that will constitute SENS 2.0. I think I will stop there, and I don't know whether there's going to be any chance of a Q&A, but maybe somebody can tell me.